live now. We are live. That's great. Okay. We have a few moments. Maybe some listeners are joining us soon. Some said they would. But in general, anyway, we will record this. We will share it on our social media. So I would say, with further ado, let's jump into it. This is The Next You, a podcast about self-development and purpose. And my name is Peter. I'm the host of this podcast. And today we do a live stream. And I'm very excited to have my coaching colleague and friend, Stephen, with me, Stephen Kennedy. He is, on the one hand side, a personal and professional coach. He's also into mentoring, and he has a lot of experience in leadership as well. And he brings more than 30 years of experience in the oil and gas industry into this. And I'm very excited to have you here, Stephen. Welcome and good morning.
Thank you. Yes, good morning from sunny Texas. Thank you for
Exactly.
this.
Yeah, it's great to have you here. And today we want to talk about midlife crisis. And basically, I use the term midlife makeover. So let's talk a little bit about, what a midlife crisis is, and how we generally can handle crisis, and how we can make sure that a crisis will turn out as a gift. But first things first, a few words maybe about yourself, what you're into at the moment, what the listeners need to know about yourself, and maybe where they can find you if they want more information. Stephen, so let us know.
Sure. Yeah. So Stephen Kennedy, I have, as Peter said, 30 years in the oil and gas industry. When I got a degree in geology, got passionate about how the earth is created, and kind of made my way into the oil and gas industry, started kind of in the bottom rung, kind of what they call mud logging, and kind of worked my way up through various roles around the world, living in the Middle East and in Azerbaijan. Finished my career in the oil and gas industry in 2021. At that time, I was working as what we call New Wells Delivery Manager in Iraq. So I was rotating out to Basra in Iraq, working on the Rumaila oil field. There was a team of about 70 people in that team. Very exciting role. And then abruptly got laid off from BP at that time. And that was kind of my... I'm not going to use the term midlife crisis because I don't like that term, but we can come back to that. But that was my crossroads kind of moment. And so from there, I found my way to coaching. I found a renewed sense of purpose in helping others through coaching. And that's the short version. And elements of that, I think, we can bring out as we illustrate some of the things we're going to talk about. But now I help people in the oil and gas industry who are facing some kind of, might call existential crisis that we find in the oil and gas industry these days. I'm helping them navigate that kind of career crossroads they might be at, and find their sense of kind of passion and purpose in life again.
Okay, interesting how you reconnect to basically what you experienced by yourself, and we will route back to that definitely. Let's introduce a little bit the topic. So as I said before, I use the term midlife makeover, and let's shortly introduce that topic a little bit. So in midlife, why do we talk about midlife crisis? Why did this term anyway come up? Because it might be a little stereotypish as well, but I come to a couple of statistics and so on later on also that explain why we all know this term sooner or later. So in general, we can describe this as having a high degree of dissatisfaction in our lives. And usually what they say is that a midlife crisis can take somewhere between 3 to 10 years, which is a wow number to me as well. And I can just refer to myself. I was not in the oil and gas industry, but for me it was automotive, and I was in that industry for 20 years. And then I decided to leave because I had, taking another word that you used, purpose. I had a lack of purpose, and it created definitely a crisis for myself at that point of time. So that's a little bit of where I routed back to this topic as well, because in the end, I always smiled at this topic, midlife crisis, midlife crisis. Generally, I had the feeling growing older is a process where life allows you to have more and more experiences, maybe even more financial funding and so on. So you can always increase the way you work, live, travel, and so on. So basically, life is giving you a lot of opportunities. But what if suddenly this train comes to a stop and you're like, wait a minute, what is happening here? I'm no longer satisfied. And what happened? What changed? For me, I was overwhelmed by that. It's like, hey, I was in that company for the last 20 years. Why suddenly it's not supposed to be my safe harbor anymore? And that ends up in knowing on the one hand side that some kind of change is needed, but on the other hand side, obviously you don't understand why, and combining those two somehow that creates a certain dissatisfaction. And for me, it went on for a couple of years where I didn't have the courage to speak out that something isn't right. So definitely my trigger was work related. And as you said before, also you had a big shift in your life, also work related, and so that can trigger a crisis or a change in midlife.
Yeah.
Before we go a little deeper into that, I was posting this week about midlife crisis and so on. I had one interesting comment I wanted to reflect about as well. Is there was a lady in her 30s and she says, "Oh my God, am I already in my midlife? Because I'm at the beginning of my 30s and I'm already feeling that way." Have you heard anything like that as well, Stephen? And what would you say to that lady that is facing those kind of experiences already in their early 30s?
I guess it comes down to how you define midlife crisis, because I told you already that I'm not a big fan of that phrase, but I know it's what people relate to. It has those connotations. If you're watching TV or a movie, the stereotype of someone in midlife crisis is they've left their job and they've bought a sports car and they're left their wife for a younger woman. That's the stereotype, right, that people have. And I don't think
Okay, yeah.
that's not the story for most people, I would say. For me, it's a crossroads. And that crossroads, for me, I found it best defined in a book called Halftime. It's an older book, and now I'm struggling to remember the name of the author. Buford, Gary Buford, I think it is, somebody Buford. And a friend of mine and a colleague gave me that book when I was 40. And it was only later in life that kind of what was in this book started to really kind of resonate with me. And the idea in this book is that once, and this is true probably especially for males, it's kind of, there's different drivers for women, I think, but once you reach a stage where you begin to realize there's less in front of you than there was behind you, I think that's a kind of a good way of summarizing it, then your sense of purpose starts to change. And yeah, there can be triggers, death of a parent or the loss of a job, or those things can be triggers. But essentially, your sense of purpose is changing from a drive to be successful, and how far up the ladder can you get, or what position can you reach? Some measure of success that you might have, to what kind of a legacy you want to leave behind. And that's a really profound change. And I think what we call midlife crisis is people navigating that change. So I think that, for women, and a lot less of my clients have been women, I have to say, but they have very different kind of drivers and a lot more kind of related to kind of balancing career and family, perhaps. And that creates a lot of changes for them. But it's whatever it comes that makes you get to that crossroads. So midlife crossroads, maybe that's a phrase that I prefer, but there you go.
Yeah, interesting. And there's also a statistic here. When I was doing a little research, that says that women are more likely to experience a midlife crisis. That was a study from the University of Alberta. And yeah, that's also interesting to see, as you mentioned already, why that might be. Because there are additional challenges family-wise, maybe different burdens, or maybe they have a different way of processing crisis. The early 30s, what I encountered, because beside midlife crisis, we already have quarter life crisis and terms like that. When I was working with some younger clients, they were stating, yeah, it's quite hard, So I invested all this time into my education now, and I had 1 or 2 jobs. I started earning money, and now I'm in this phase of, let's say, maybe late 20s, early 30s, where I'm supposed to make a lot of major decisions. Decide where you finally want to work, decide in what city or country you want to live. What kind of relationship is now your long-term relationship that you want to commit to somehow, because you have expectations towards yourself. You're getting in the age of getting married, so you better know who it is and things like that. So there's a lot of private and work-related things that they want to create stability, and they feel like, wow, I'm overwhelmed. I already need to make those decisions. And that already can be overwhelming, definitely. And but rooting this back to midlife, I love what you said, that a different sense and definition of purpose, of what we are supposed to what we want to leave behind in this life. This might come in midlife. And for me, there was a very simple question. Suddenly I could say, I did this kind of work for 20 years. Do I want to do this for the next 20 years? And it was a hell no. It was a hell no, and it scared me a lot. But if I would be on the job for 5 years, I would have been like, I'm going to have another job and see where this goes. I'm not in this experience mode anymore when I'm in midlife. I have that experience now. How I want to use it? How I want to use the seniority and all those experience, and how is my impact and the way I want to create impact. And maybe we can say, that there's certain form in our 20s and 30s, we are looking a lot on impact on ourselves, creating a family, creating a safe environment, safe spaces for us and our loved ones, and so on. But later, with the 40s and going further, maybe then the challenges are turning. And to add to the reasons, go ahead.
Jump in and say that I can't remember who. Well, one of my clients that I was talking to was describing it as in their 30s, like, oh shit, I've got to be an adult now. So there's almost a sense of responsibility, that you realize that there's a responsibility. So maybe there's that. Your definitions of success and significance have changed to include a wider circle perhaps than they did before, and it's a bit more important. So I think if we're going to use the term crossroads, it is another one of those crossroads. How am I going to adapt to this adult life of responsibility? And I think that's the change that people can go through around that age.
And stepping into that responsibility. Beside this role change, responsibility change, purpose change, what can be other reasons to get into midlife crisis? For example, relationship, married, kids are growing older, kids are starting to leave home, in the early or mid 40s. The kids might be 15 years old or something, they are starting to make their own lives, and suddenly we are getting back into that area. So relationship, marriages, and all kinds of breakdowns related to that might be triggering a certain sense of crisis. There's definitely, they're definitely a source of crisis. On the other hand, it could be financially, if we were not able to, have a stable financial setup, then we might shift our view now towards retirement already. Okay, hi, there's 2 decades to go. How am I going to solve this? And and that might trigger a certain form of crisis. And maybe the purpose related things, they are rather on the more existential side of reasons. When we start, asking ourselves deeper questions, we are going maybe a little bit into some spiritual adventures as well. We open up our horizon, getting perspectives on life, starting to asking deeper questions, and somehow we have that desire to give back, and how we create that impact.
To be honest, I think it almost does go back to some of those deeper questions, and I think that the other things that you've described are the symptoms. Those are the things that we recognize if you're, got this lack of satisfaction at work, or you're uncertain of your financial future and how important that is to you. I think all of those things stem from something deeper. I think those are the things that make us realize, oh, wait a minute, something's going on. But I think to deal with them, it almost invariably does go back to some of those deeper questions. I think that's the root of it.
Did you come along some kind of questions? How did you perceive it in your life? Or was it triggered, for example, when suddenly your career in oil and gas abruptly stopped? Or how did you experience that?
Well, so I know from talking to my clients, a lot of them, it can be like a drip of different things and a growing awareness. I think for me, it was a lot more abrupt. And I think, it can be either. I think it's important to realize that everyone has a different story for how they reach this crossroads. For me, so in 2020, the company that I worked for at the time, BP, announced that they were going to be laying off a third of the staff in the group that I worked in. And I found out that I was going to lose my position. And it was my favorite role that I'd had in my career. I loved working out in Iraq. Terrific people that I was working with. Loved the atmosphere, loved the responsibility. So it was a great role. And then I found out I was going to lose it in the same week that my father passed away. And my mother had passed away in the same year in 2020. That same month, my wife had a miscarriage, and her father had a massive stroke. So a lot of things happened in a short space of time. And, those things they're bound to send you into a lot of kind of self-reflection, right? So yeah, that really propelled me into, I was required to do sort of self-reflection. And I think you can run away from the self-reflection, and that's when you go into the spiral, and that's when you're going to make maybe some crazy kind of decisions. But if you embrace that self-reflection, for me, I ended up, and it was a journey, and probably a journey that I'm still on, but I was able to come out of it thinking, you know what, my parents passed away at home during a time that was very difficult for many. They got to pass away with family around them. So I was able to kind of see, the positive in what had happened. And losing the job, I was able to turn that around into, okay, well, now I get to choose what am I going to head towards. And that was not a sudden, okay, I'm going to do this. It was not a logical thing. It was something that I really had to slowly work on, because you're sort of changing an element of what you thought your identity was, right? You're loosening the knot of this idea of, I am an oil and gas geologist. And it takes time. You can't just simply say, okay, unhook from that identity and latch it to something else. You've actually just got to gradually work away at it. And for me,
is there a different level in which you are defining your identity right now? Or is it rather, yes, work is an important part of it, but there are other pillars to it? Or how would you describe it?
So I mean, I think we're now getting into, with that question, what do you do if you find yourself in a midlife crisis? And I really do fundamentally believe that the answer is to figure out who you really are. And by that, I say really start to look at, what are my values? What makes me who I am? And I had to stop calling myself, in my mind, in my head, If I was asking or someone was asking me who I am, I would say, oh, I'm an oil and gas geologist. I do this. But we're not what we necessarily do. We are our values. And when I realized that what was important to me was beyond just my job, and started to think about what was really important to me, working with a coach, I was able to come up with a phrase that actually for me, it was just a sentence that I kind of put together that just helped me have a yardstick to help make those decisions, that wasn't linked to my job. And it was, that I was just learning to say, so who am I? Well, I live life with purpose and integrity in a way that honors God and lovingly supports my family. And that sentence became so important for me, just to kind of discover that sentence was a kind of a brand of who I am. And it didn't say the words oil and gas geologist or what I do, but it said why I do it, and why that's important to me. So I think that that idea of discovering your values, however you're going to do that, is really important.
Okay.
Are you familiar with Mesereau?
No, I'm not.
I might be pronouncing his name wrong. I don't know, but it was somebody that when I was doing the coaching training that I come up, and it was what causes us to change, and he had four criteria that he reckoned caused people to change. And one of them, my favorite one, was the first one that he called a disorienting dilemma. Mm-hmm. So a disorienting dilemma. And I think that's what happens in a situation where your parents die or you lose your job or one of those things. That creates one of those situations. And another one was state of puzzlement. So if you start to kind of become confused, well, hang on, why is this not working for me anymore? Or, you're just gradually finding out that things are not the way you expected them to be. Mm-hmm. Another one was recognition that others feel the same way. So this might be, well, I don't want to put labels on it because it's going to mean different things to different people. But I know I've had clients that have experienced that feeling as well. And then the final one is an empathetic provocateur, which I think is another lovely phrase. And for me, that's what coaching is all about, right? It's empathy, but it's also being a little bit of a provocateur as well. It's challenging, but in an empathetic way. So the point I'm making, I guess, is that I think those situations cause us to change, and we can wait until we get to that disorienting dilemma that creates us in a position where we're susceptible to change. But we can also be a little bit proactive as well, and that coaching is helpful. But there can be other empathetic provocateurs in your life. I think if you have a spiritual bent, your spiritual leader could be an empathetic provocateur. If you're really fortunate in your life, you might have a spouse that's a empathetic provocateur. So I think we all can find those people in our lives when we need them. But I think it's important to act and find an empathetic provocateur before you actually reach that moment of crisis.
And for me, that is the underlying term is somehow gaining perspective. And that provocative part in it would be, hey, look at something another way, or have you considered this or that? And really asking questions we usually not come around. And be it a spouse, a friend, a colleague, or a coach, or whatsoever. There are many contexts, or even communities in which you will encounter those kind of perspectives, right? So I like what you say. And so I guess that's one important part also of our conversation is, so do I need to wait until midlife, until I finally have this crisis so I can turn this into something good? Well, have a look. Some people don't have that crisis, and some people might already experience it in their early 30s and whatsoever. So maybe one key is to not just stay in your own bubble, but to somehow pull yourself into a different view on your life, right? And gaining that perspective might be just translating this gaining perspective into maybe a daily, weekly, monthly kind of habit. And as you mentioned, there are many ways of doing it. It can be a habit with yourself. It could be meditation, but it could be also being part of a community. Going once a year to, maybe you make holidays alone, or things like that. Just that you find a way on how to process things and get new and invite new perspectives, and that can dramatically increase your awareness about what's going on. And once you have that awareness, you might see the symptoms we talked about before and start taking corrective actions, right?
Yeah, you talked there about taking some time for yourself, and certainly when I think back to another time in my life when I was going through a very difficult time, and I was struggling to see the way ahead, I took a week away and I went to a resort that was too expensive for me at the time, but I thought, I need this time. And I spent a week by myself, and I came back a changed person. I can really look at that time as having marked a change. And it was after that that I met my wife, I'm incredibly happy with, and found a renewed sense of purpose, both at work and the church that I was going to at the time. So in all different areas of my life changed as a result of actually looking after myself a little bit at that time. So yeah, I think that's really important.
Yeah, nice. Okay. I wanted to bring in another perspective into this. And while I was looking into some statistics and so on, it was interesting to see that in general, the dissatisfaction of life, it's like the dissatisfaction is very high in midlife, obviously. But then on the other hand side, I found a lot of stuff about people are happiest in their 50s and 60s. And it was interesting to see also what kind of documentation is available about this. And what was told is, well, basically, back to what you said before, they have established routines in their life. They have established work, family, friends, and they have a deeper sense of where they belong. And this all adds up again to this term of purpose. So they have made the work, be it in tiny little steps, maybe with or without the midlife crisis on board or not, but they made that work that give them a certain meaning and fulfillment. And they might already have investing more time into this right now than other people in their 30s and 40s, working hard on their career and are the achievers. But they might reprioritize certain things, and their time management might be different. And also they have developed relationships that are on a different level. With so many years into your life, you have your trusted friends, relationships, and whatsoever. And that is a source of happiness and contentment. And they might just throw the resilient part into it as well, because their life has taught them many lessons. And I always ask myself, so that would mean, okay, now you're in your 30s, buckle up, because you better work on your satisfaction right now and your purpose right away, because otherwise midlife crisis is hitting you hard. But anyway, statistics says you need to wait until the 50s. So how do you think can we turn this around and say, because I'm in my early 40s, I don't want to wait another 10 or 15 or 20 years. So how do you think can we pull ahead those kind of knowledge and practices, and that everybody can create that life and create that purpose?
That's a really good question. I think it does go back to the idea that even though at an earlier stage, success might be more important to you, or you might have different priorities than I do in my early 50s and you in your 40s. But what you can always still work on is a sense of who you are and why you do what you do, and I think that can really make a difference. And I think it underpins this kind of idea. There's another book and podcast out there called The Squiggly Career. And it's this idea that, there's a lot less now of people joining a firm and staying with that company through their entire career and working their way up the ladder. But actually, people have squiggly careers. They can make kind of radical left turns in their career and go off in an apparently different direction, but it's still a path, and it's still a valid path. And what can give you the confidence to do that and feel like you have a sense of purpose, if you're really in touch with why you do what you do and who you really are. I think that's the answer to that one.
Yeah, I love that one. And I encountered in my own transformation that I started feeling a sense of crisis because I lost purpose, and a key was to find it and define it. But how do you define it? You just start starting to write down why you do it. But it is a journey in creating a knowledge about yourself, and a very practical thing of what means knowledge about ourselves. I always say, create vocabulary that describes you. What are the classical terms, sentences, buzzwords, hashtags, whatever you want, that represent yourself? And I just come off with a feedback session of a client of mine, and he said, working on the purpose, first he didn't understand why we would root to this topic, but now after working for that for a couple of weeks, he understood, okay, I got to know myself, I got to describe myself, I know in what kind of areas of life and situations I'm powerful and I can use my strength, and what kind of areas I'm usually do not feel well. And if I'm in a work environment, especially as he had it at the moment, then and maybe that requires a lot of things you need to do that are not really part of what you usually are good at, you might feel a little weird. And maybe then you receive a couple of feedbacks, as he did also from his superiors, like, we see you're struggling with this and that. And instead of taking this as, I have a weakness and I need to work on this and struggle. No, he's just turning it around right now with self-knowledge and says, yes. And then I can explain you why, this and this and this is not the content I usually thrive in. I want to create contexts in which I do this and that. And I'm a technical guy and I want to get lost in details and data and solve the problem and whatsoever. But I'm not the guy who makes a fancy presentation and rocks the stage for you. I'm just not that guy. And I want to create more of this because this is more me. And this will help me to create my purpose. Because wherever I connect with my strength, whenever I understand the learnings of life, whenever, back to what you said before, whenever I know how to translate my values into my daily and weekly life on how I show up towards my friends, family, and work, then I can really feel that purpose. And that gives me a lot of confidence, and self-confidence comes from self-knowledge. And that is how that client now is expressing his purpose and is very happy with it.
Yeah, and there's a couple of things I want to pick up on there with what you've said. I think are really cool about your client's story. So one thing, having kind of been in a leadership position before, I know that when someone that's working in your team says something like that, that's really scary for the person in the team, right? It's not something that people naturally feel comfortable doing, but it's a gift as a leader. It's like, great, I know how to motivate this person and I know how to get the best out of this person now. So it's actually a gift. And really for an effective team, it's kind of a different topic about teams, I guess, but it really helps to know that you've got a variety in your team so that you can actually get the best out of your team. You don't want a team of like-minded people. And I think that's important as well. Coming back to our topic of that kind of, midlife crossroads, that, you don't have to be like everyone else. You don't have to be like the person in the next cubicle at work, who you are isn't defined by the box you're in at work. It's defined by something much deeper and more profound inside. And something else that I would say that sparked by what you were talking about your client's experience when they came to you, that initial discomfort about talking about values. I think that's another really important thing that comes to, how do I know when I'm getting into this situation? And I think for many, myself included, when you're getting into that moment where you're beginning to freeze because you've got this crisis kind of moment, it's because things have become really binary. Oh, shit, am I going to do this or am I going to do this? It comes down to this kind of binary choice. And really, as I would be interested to know if it's the same experience that you have, but as a coach, it's often about getting people to back away from that kind of decision and say, okay, let's just move away from that for a moment. Let's rediscover who you are. And that's why working on the values first, the sense of identity that is much kind of deeper. Once you've worked on those values and figured out what's really important to them, then you can start talking about the vision of where they want to be. So you're looking before this kind of binary question and you're looking after this binary question. What's your values? What's your vision of where you want to be? And once they've got those, you just draw a line straight between them, and then whatever obstacles are in the way, it becomes a lot clearer. Oh, well, I need to do this and I need to do that. The other things fall into place. But it's difficult to do that moment because your brain is in fight or flight mode. It's in survival mode. And so it's am I going to, fight or flight? Is it going to be this or this? And so actually getting people just to start a different part of their brain, think a little bit differently. I think that's, our job as a coach to help people into that space.
Yeah, I love what you say. And it's about acknowledge where you are. Life is about ups and downs, and give it a little space where you're in right now so that you can, reconsider and have a clear picture maybe later on. But I used to say, especially to people that come to me and say, I'm not happy in my job and I'm in the process of applying to other jobs, but I'm not so sure, what can I do? And then, the kind of message is, stop, just hold on, stop, take a break. And I always say, before jumping to another job, just go deep first, connect to what we talked about, find out values and purpose and create based on that a vision and so on. I use the word of having your compass and then integrate back into the world, be it the job world, relationship world, whatsoever world. You have your compass and you can say, this relationship is not working because exactly that's where my values are not reflected or whatsoever. Or that kind of work would be great for me because it allows me to create the context where I thrive and so on. So that compass, I think, is needed. And some people can connect to that just naturally. Some people's life are, maybe full of those trial and error phases where they have the ability to find this. So such a midlife crossroad never shows up. But somehow for people that eventually never had such a deep reflection, or life just didn't play the way it might have played for others, bring them another opportunity for looking deeper into it.
I think you and I were talking some time ago about a moment that I had when watching the news a month or two ago, and it was the Turkey earthquake, and at that point, I was getting to a stage where I had a kind of fairly significant decision to make, and I was kind of barreling along like a mole underground, just burrowing away, thinking, I know I've got to get in that direction over there. Then I was watching the news and watching the earthquake, and I could see the rubble, the debris, the noise, the diggers, people kind of sort of taking all the rubble away, all this activity, chaos, and then there was a whistle, and everyone stopped, complete silence, because they wanted to hear the tiniest voice, the little bit of breathing or faint voice that they could hear. Everyone absolutely stopped to listen. And it was kind of a profound moment for me. I thought, you know what? I'm really good at stopping to listen when everything's going really well. But when there's chaos and there's urgency and shit, I really need to find the solution to this kind of a moment, that actually those are the moments that it's really important to stop and hear that little still quiet voice that you're going to find within yourself, that tells you what's really important to you. Difficult to do, but do it in the chaos as well as those kind of moments when everything's going great. I think that would be what I learned.
Okay. Yeah, nice. And I think, in the end, the acknowledgement of the situation and slowing down, basically creating perspective on it, allowing you to see maybe things from a different perspective is key. And let's talk maybe about the later stage of such a transformation when it comes to reintegrating it back, taking action. Because in the end, I think that the mind-related or also emotionally related work that might be needed in midlife, in this crossroads we are meeting, it is important, not to, like I say, not to experience that for too long. Once we have a realization, once we have a compass, once we have a purpose, it's important to create action so that we can create positive experiences, because all our inner beliefs that have built up for decades and so on, it is dramatically simple to transform them once we create action that are powerful enough to prove that now there might be a new reality, a new purpose, a new way of impacting life, my own well-being, the well-being of others, and whatsoever. So how about that part? How do you experience it personally for yourself or your clients, or what do you want to share in that area?
Can I flip that around and ask you, when you're working with your clients, how do you know when they've reached a moment when right, it's okay, we've built the foundation, it's time to go ahead and build the rest now? How do you know when you've reached that tipping point when it's time to take action?
I usually have a moment. It is a moment that is partially very emotional. And it happens around when we start defining purpose, and clients, I ask them to write a manifest, as I call it, which is basically an explanation on why they have this why. And it is a summary of, my life was a certain experience. It was like a training camp. And now I understand why I had this kind of life, why I had to learn this and that, why I had to go through this ups and downs and whatsoever, bring me exactly to this point. And now I understand why I am as I am. And once they have this vision, this kind of aha moment of connecting the dots, this is what happens at that moment. They connect the dots of their past life, their current situation, and their future opportunities. They connect those dots. And at that moment, I know now it's time to create action and prove to them that this new experience that they created, this new awareness that they created, exists in reality. And so it can be tiny little actions at work, tiny little actions in relationships, tiny little actions how you take care of yourself. And that proved to you, yeah, now I feel it. I'm in this new energy. This is something I really like. Oh, I never did this before, and now it feels great. So those little experiences are important. And that's a moment where I know that this is the turnaround.
Yeah. I like that. So I guess people at that moment, the way you've described it as well brings me back to this idea of people come in this situation when they need help because there's this massive mountain in front of them, and they're thinking, I'm stuck. I've got a mountain. I don't know what to do. And actually, the coaching helps them see where they've come from, what path they're on, and what's the journey, what's their destination, where they want to go. And I think once people know where they are and what their destination is, that the mountain just doesn't seem to matter. Oh, well, yeah, clearly I'm just going to go that route, and I'm going to go over that pass, or I'm going to go around the mountain this way. And it almost becomes the easy part of the journey to make, once you've figured out where it is that you're really going. They're building a hotel just opposite the apartment complex where I'm staying. And they started work on it. And for a long, long time, they were building the foundations, and there was kind of mud, and it was boring. And then eventually, after months, the foundations were ready. And in a matter of weeks, all of this structure was kind of appearing. And I think it's a little bit like that. You do all of this deep work to prepare the foundations, and then the fun part comes. We have another colleague who talks about the blueprint, right? once you've got the foundation and you've prepared your blueprint, then it's just, you building the building. It's almost the easy part.
Yeah. And then comes the ease again into the life. Right?
Is that an oversimplification, do you think, or what's your?
No, I don't think
thoughts?
so. No, I think it's a nice way to say that. And foundational work can take some time, depending on where we're at and how much understanding we have about ourselves. And but once it's there, yeah. So in other words, once the compass is there, once this understanding of self is there, suddenly we create. And I think that's, to bring it together a little bit, there's a lot of going towards ourselves and creating this kind of compass, connecting to values and purpose, and out of that reintegrated action wise bit by bit into our daily lives with routines, with contexts that we thrive in, and then we are connected to ourselves. And again, then there's confidence because there's self-knowledge. And that is also what I understood, and that what happened to me. I needed a timeout. I went away from work and I reworked on a completely new foundation. So using the picture you just used, yeah. So, and right now it's building and building and building, yeah. And that's the great part. That's the fun part.
Absolutely. And I if I think of going back to this question of how do you know when you're ready to take action, when people start this kind of journey of and I know I was in that situation, it's like I have this kind of choice to make, and it was about career in my case. What do I do? But the moment that I realized I was ready to take action was when I saw career as one element of the whole picture. And that moment, I think, when I've got clients, when I know they're ready, it's when they're actually saying, well, this decision would help my career this way, but it would help my family this way, and it would help, they look at all the elements of their life. And that's when you know that they're ready to make a decision, because they've actually stepped back and they've got a more realistic view of who they are as a person, and not just tied up in their job.
Yeah, great. Okay. And Stephen, I think we're going to wrap it up. And yeah, go ahead, please.
Just to like a practical kind of tool for people who think they're in that situation. Really, just draw a circle, divide it. Two lines across to divide it into 6, and figure out of all the elements that are important to you, kind of label them. And it might be 4, 5, 6 things. It might be job, it might be family, it might be finances. It's going to be different for everyone what those things are. And if you've got a couple of decisions in front of you, say, okay, if I go down this path, how does this wheel of life score for me? And if you're going to go down this other path, what does the score look like? And look at it visually, draw it in on a scale, and look at it. And that can be a really useful visual to kind of get a sense. And I think as you're doing that, you'll have a kind of a gut feeling about how you feel when you're kind of doing that and filling that in as to what the right decision might be.
I love that. Yeah, I really love it. Stephen, so thank you so much for your time.
Really enjoyed it.
Tell us a little at the end, how can people find you? So if you're in oil and gas and you experience a crisis, definitely Stephen is the go-to person, but maybe not only in oil and gas. But so if people are interested to finding out more about you, where can they find you?
Yeah, so currently I'm working with kind of oil and gas professionals, and I'm also working with ex-military who also have this sense of kind of leaving kind of military career after maybe 20 years and having to kind of redefine their sense of identity and culture and who they are. So if you're in that position, then you can reach out to me. Easy to find on LinkedIn. Stephen Kennedy, that's Stephen with a PH, or I have a website, www.crowncoaching.com. So you can find me in either of those places. And you know what? Don't hesitate to reach out. I'm always interested to hear people's stories. You're going to benefit from just telling your story, and I'm going to benefit from hearing it. So I'm always happy to have those conversations and then see where it goes from there.
Great. That sounds like a great offer. And Stephen, thank you so much for sharing your insights, your wisdom about midlife crossroads. That's the term now we're gonna use, and I love that one. And thank you for sharing, and thank you for joining me today for this live podcast. And all the best to you. And obviously, later on, I'll share also those details in the descriptions of our videos. Thanks again. Have a great weekend, and everyone out there, don't hesitate to reach out to Stephen whenever it comes to midlife crossroads. He can definitely help you out and whatever other problems you're facing. So thanks again. Talk to you soon, Stephen.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you. Have a good weekend.
Okay. Take care. Bye-bye to everyone.